First technique I wanted to talk about is land conservation easements. And you want to start by describing what that is?
Yeah, sure. So, land conservation easements were actually started in the 1970s, and they were really more seen as if you owned your own personal piece of land and you wanted to conserve it, which basically means you're not allowed to really do anything with it. You can't develop it, you can't put houses on it, et cetera. There's just a few minor things you can do, like farming, for example. And so, what it basically does is the IRS takes a look at your land and says, okay, if you were to appraise the land, if it were to be developed, then what would that value be? And if you looked at the land, if it weren't to be developed, what would that amount be? And that tax difference is a charitable deduction. So you're basically giving up the right to use the land for anything meaningful, and this obviously will provide a tax deduction, and it can usually range from the ones that I've invested in, and so that's kind of a thing to know is that I've invested in these myself, is that for every dollar you put in, you're getting back a certain amount in charitable deduction. So if you put a dollar in, you're getting $5 back in charitable deduction. And you can go up to 50% of your adjusted gross income. And that saves you um, about 45% in tax. So it's a really, really nice deduction. The problem has been when these have started to be built up with syndications, there has been a big area of abuse, and mainly with crazy appraisals, where instead of getting like a 1 to 5 multiple, maybe you're getting a 1 to 20 multiple or a 10 multiple. And that's where, you start to kind of get into to hot water. um, so the what's great about these is that, yes, you get a kind of big bang for your buck, but there has been a lot of litigation around them. At one point, they were actually listed transactions. We can talk more about that sort of legality as well, and legislation that happened. But now for 2020, started at the end of 2022, land easements for at least syndication purposes have been limited to 2.5 multiple. And so it's really a dollar for dollar kind of reduction. You're putting $100,000 into the investment, and you're getting $100,000 off your taxes. So you're basically paying this place instead of just paying the taxes, essentially. So it's not as beneficial anymore. And for disclosure purposes, I did invest in them from 2018 until 2020. But I understood the risks involved. It's basically that it's pretty much guaranteed that you're going to be audited. And it's not you that's audited, it's the partnership that is audited. And so, but if there's any change at the partnership level, it trickles down to you as the investor. So you have to understand that risk, but know that if you are working with a proper program offer, that they do have audit funds. And so they usually have about $500,000 of audit funds. They've set things up properly. I went through a lot of vetting to feel comfortable with it myself, and through a lot of years before I even felt comfortable doing it. And so you just have to make sure that, if you are going to do it, which like I said, I don't recommend it going forward just because the cost benefit isn't there anymore, that you properly vet whoever you're going to work with, or even if they're offering anything similar. Because I've seen, this is going a touch off topic we can maybe talk about after, but there's now, instead of doing land conservation easements, they'll have medical products that they're donating to hospitals at a reduce or at the fair market value, but they're buying it at like a wholesale rate. And then, you're getting, up to 50% AGI again, and et cetera. But I've seen started happening in the past few years. And it's not, I'm not comfortable with it yet.
Yeah, maybe we ought to explain for those who don't know what a listed transaction is. What does that mean?
Yeah, so that basically is kind of the I guess the more media appropriate name is the Dirty Dozen list. And so these are just transactions that the IRS is looking at closely, and more for the abusive transactions. And so that's very important language. These transactions are not considered illegal. It's just they've been abused in a lot of areas. And so another one I think we're going to be talking about in a little bit, like captive insurance companies were on that list for a while. And like both with the captive and the land easement, both of those were actually taken off the list retrospectively because the IRS did not go through the proper motions to put them on the list properly. Um, and so technically, looking back, they weren't ever on the list, but yes. So they're basically just strategies that the IRS takes a closer look at and scrutinizes further.
Yeah, I've talked to some other people about this and looked some other stuff up about it. Ike Devji, he does a lot of asset protection kind of stuff. He calls them the tax scam that doctors sell each other. So I think it's something that is fairly prevalent out there in the medical community. Um, and there's somebody else, a law professor around here, that said that yeah, it's possible to have one that's okay, but I haven't seen it yet. And so this one's definitely, I think, on the aggressive side. Like in
It
Star
is.
Wars when they talk about aggressive negotiations. They're talking about a lightsaber duel, but it's interesting as I talk to tax people, I find some are very, very conservative and never want to do anything that could even possibly, you know, uh, look bad in an audit and so forth. And then other people are fairly, on the other side of the spectrum. Where would you place yourself on that spectrum?
I am of the spectrum. I All the strategies use are court tested, IRS approved. I don't put anything on a tax return. I don't feel comfortable defending in an audit. So even if you know, we're playing in the gray area, as long as I feel comfortable defending it, then I'll go for it. So I mean, there's going to be items on this list that we're discussing today that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. But that's because I just don't feel comfortable that I could, you know, make it stand muster in an audit. But with land easements, I've followed the legislation around it really closely, and I have really great resources and some of the top attorneys that defend these as well that I've spoken with. And so and when I've also done the math, uh, if you were to take the tax savings that you receive and over the 6 to 10 year period that this investment is open, because the thing is that at least the ones that I invest into, they do a land conservation easement, but they also put some of the money that you've invested into a strategic fund that also invests in other real estate, venture debt, there's other ton of investments. Because one of the stances that the IRS has is that you can't create a partnership for the sake of a tax deduction. So this allows, like, yes, we're investing in this one development, but we're also investing in other things as well. And so over that 6 to 10 year period, you are earning some money off of your investment. Um, but it's small compared to obviously what the major tax benefit in that first year that you have. But I found that doing these that if you take that investment that you've or the tax savings and then you invest it even in an ETF, which over the past 10 years it's been about 9% in earnings per year, you'll earn more off of that savings than you would in the interest and penalties that would be involved if it were even to be completely denied. And from my research and understanding is that even the ones that have been adjusted, on average, you're still maintaining 80% value. So you're maybe getting adjustment of 20%. And so it's kind of like playing an interest game essentially. So it just with this strategy and any of these strategies we're talking about, it really depends on your situation. It really depends on how you or your advisor feels about those situations and whether they're willing to feel comfortable in defending it before you even think about investing in it. the education is extremely important. And that's one thing with Cerebral and what we do is, we don't take any commissions or kickbacks. We don't sell any products. And it's really about educating and showing the options. So then that way you're at least aware of them. And then it's up to you whether or not you want to move forward with it.
The hosts of The White Coat Investor are not licensed accountants, attorneys, or financial advisors. This podcast is for your entertainment and information only. It should not be considered professional or personalized financial advice. You should consult the appropriate professional for specific advice relating to your situation.